Welcome everyone to What the Force, and welcome to a new, I would say, segment. I'm going to start it out as a segment on the thematic essentials of Star Wars. And with me to cover the theme of hope is Felicia Wisniewski, who is literally like one of my music experts. So welcome to a non-musical episode.
Yeah.
They're significantly easier to edit, by the way.
Well, I'm here for you. That's what I do.
Having you come back on something that is not specifically music related makes me very happy because it takes me maybe a tenth of the time to edit.
I mean, I get that. And I kind of forgot that most people knew me for my music metas, but I look back, I was like, oh, I did write some non-musical ones. I just don't really remember those because no one looks at them. But I did write them.
And the reason we were like, hey, let's talk about this, and you pitched this idea to me, was you noticed that I had never really covered the concept of hope kind of more generally on the podcast. And, and it really made me think I haven't really covered kind of the thematic essentials of Star Wars and, what is being said, how it's being said, how does it play out typically in most of the materials? And then when we don't see it, why it may feel off.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. When we're trying to get into this topic, specifically with The Rise of Skywalker, it was something that I felt was not heavily emphasized in the story. The word wasn't used. I don't even know if it was even used.
I wonder if it was in the trailer. All the words that would come up.
Yeah.
Maybe it was in there. I don't remember. I'd have to go back and look.
Yeah, I don't know that it was used, actually. And that, to me, was almost jarring. It might have been, but it certainly wasn't.
It wasn't a central part of it it has been previous films.
Yeah, like a central tenet to, the story. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope.
Yeah.
Leia, getting delivered the final Death Star plans at the end of Rogue One after that hallway of horror with Darth Vader. And she's like, what is that? And she's like, hope. It is something that is baked into the DNA of Star Wars. And yet we kind of just take it for granted, I think. In many ways.
I think it's important that to note that originally episode 4 wasn't called A New Hope. It was just called Star Wars, but it was an important enough concept that at the time, that was the central theme of what we started on, was that this was a new hope for the galaxy. And we kind of came back around to it and then kind of veered off and sort of lost it a little bit. But in the beginning, once they kind of had to rename them, they were like, yeah, this is the basis of what this story is about. It's about hope.
Yeah, everything is in the darkness and suddenly there's a light. There's a really great moment in the Vader 2017 Charles Soule run where after Vader's internal journey into himself and his subconscious, he looks out over the balcony after he's lost everything again, kind of in his subconscious, and he sees on the horizon this bright light. And in the middle of the light is standing Luke. And he doesn't know that's Luke. He doesn't know, what the meaning of that light is at that moment. Probably for years, he doesn't know what it means until he finds out that Luke is his son and that, Padme and him had a child. He doesn't understand that that was his hope in that moment. And that light is his hope. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's really, really important for us to discuss, hope and then how we use Star Wars as a lens to keep on going even through all of the hardship, seeing these characters that go through it and yet still have dreams of a better tomorrow in some ways. And Leia herself very much exemplifies that in most of the movies.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So I went through and I just did a control F on the scripts. And so I think a lot of the prequel ones, actually, it includes a lot of like deleted scenes that were just still in the script, but didn't actually make it in the cut. And a lot of these aren't like hope in the sense of something that's very like big and resounding. Sometimes it's just like, oh, I really hope they do that. Or like, oh, I hope we get out of here. But let's see. Phantom Menace had 5, 10, 15, 19 instances. Attack of the Clones had 9. Revenge of the Sith had 12. Rogue One also had 12. Then
rebellions are built on hope.
They are indeed. A New Hope has 7. Empire has 6. And then Return of the Jedi has 5. Then in the sequel trilogy, The Force Awakens only has 2. Rey says both of them. And then The Last Jedi has 5. And I don't know how many are in Rise of Skywalker. Because I obviously don't have a copy of the script to control F that on, and I haven't gone to the film to write it down. But I think I'm actually going again tomorrow with a friend. So I'll write it down and maybe I'll send it to you. And then Solo has 13 in it. And like, it's interesting because in the beginning, like the kind of notable quotes. So like in the Phantom Menace, Shmi says to Anakin, "You have brought hope to those who have none." And then when she asks, like, "Do you believe that we'll see each other again?" He says, "I hope so. Yes."
What does your heart tell you? Yeah.
Yeah. In Attack of the Clones, again, like on Tatooine, talking about like after his mother's been taken, it says there's little hope that she's lasted this long. There really isn't much notable about how hope is used in Revenge of the Sith. A lot of it actually shows up in pieces that were deleted from the movie. So part of it was in the scene at the end where they're deciding what to do with Luke and Leia. I guess there was a piece of a line that was cut out or whatever that was basically, I think, Obi-Wan asking Yoda, do these two have what it takes to defeat Palpatine? And Yoda says something that we can only hope or something like that. But that part isn't in there. Obviously in A New Hope, tell me Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope, which comes back in episode 8 as well. Then in Empire, that boy is our only hope. No, there is another. So yes, like rounding it back around to Leia. So then there really isn't too much in 6 or 7. In 7, it's mostly just like when Rey is talking to herself and she's like, we're about to get some cover. And then she's like, I hope. She's like just talking to herself. But in 8, it's like everywhere. So obviously there's the quote that Leia says where it's like, hope is like the sun. If you only believe in it when you can see it, you'll never make it through the night. So obviously that has a lot of resonance. But also when Snoke is talking to Kylo, was talking about if Skywalker still lives, hope lives. So that's very clear about what that's like. When Rey again hands Luke the saber, he doesn't take it. She says, then he is our last hope, in reference to Ben Solo. And when Snoke has Rey and she like pulls Kylo's saber off his belt, and he says to Rey that she still has that fiery spit of hope, which is the true nature of a Jedi. So there's so much instance of it that we got that we were like, yes, it's all rounding up. It's all coming home. And then we don't really see that sort of like play out. That idea of hope had been recognized from literally every angle of the galaxy. Snoke recognized it. Leia recognized it. Rey recognized it. Luke recognized it. Like every single person who was involved in this story understood what that hope was, which centers around Rey and it centers around Ben. And then we didn't really see it fulfilled, which is very odd because we kind of like slowly built up to it for like 7 movies. 8 was like, here it is. Everyone is aware of the situation on every platform of this galaxy. They're all aware. That's hard.
Yeah. And in my opinion, it's one of the things that has defined Star Wars kind of in the Skywalker age, which we don't know officially what will be next. I mean, there's lots of speculation, like they're going back in the past or they're going far in the future. Like we don't know officially yet. And, you know, by the time this episode comes out, maybe we'll get some announcements, which would be really, really cool. But it has defined this age because of how important those words were coming from Leia's voice. We are in a hopeless situation, but you, Obi-Wan Kenobi, General Kenobi, are my only hope. You are the only pathway out of the darkness. Hope is linked thematically and symbolically with light in Star Wars, and it's used all over the place to show that you are, if you're bathed in light or you're drawn to the light or whatever, that is the hope in the darkness. So like Ben Solo's lines in The Force Awakens, specifically, when he's speaking to the Vader mask, I feel it again, the call to the light, is him having hope that he can escape his dark side prison in some ways. Mm-hmm. Because, it's very clear that dark side users are actually a prisoner of their own sort of dark sideness.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's like it's a maze that perpetually traps you in the darkness, and you think that the only way to escape it is by gaining more and more power. It's very much like any sort of trap that you think that by fighting against it and by controlling it that you're able to actually escape it. But the key that was calling him the whole time was this call to the light, and that hope resonating with him. And it was never gone, and it was never extinguished. We see that symbolically throughout his character, him mentioning it, him understanding it, him, seeing an escape path, or like one of the things that it is in some ways kind of devastating is that hope can also drive you more crazy, in a way, right? Like it can be a point of, hey, I think I can see an escape, and never being able to reach it could be. There's a line in Ken Liu's Legends of Luke Skywalker, which is coming out this month. And might be out actually by the time this podcast comes out, basically talking about how the hope of figuring out how to get yourself out of the darkness and never being able to reach it creates learned helplessness. Mm-hmm. And that helplessness reinforces the submission to the dark side.
Yeah. And it's interesting because there is a certain level that just the idea of perspective plays into how you're able to acquire and maintain hope. Mm-hmm. And there is a level of self-fulfilled prophecy in it that if you have the idea of what it is that you want and you're hoping for, but maybe you don't have the ability to put it into action, or the perspective that you have on it is not like beneficial or healthy or available because of the circumstance that you're in, you can get yourself looped into a self-fulfilled prophecy of saying like, I would hope for this and this is what I want, but this is what's going to happen. And then it does. Or you can use it to your advantage, and you might be in the pits of all despair, but to say, no, I know that things are going to be better, even if, it's a fake it till you make it thing. Mm-hmm. That's its own form of self-fulfilled prophecy as well. And sometimes it's hard to maintain hope for long periods of time when you don't see the results coming in, because you think, what is the point of this? I'm not getting anywhere, when you really could be just one more spoonful away from getting through the mind wall that you're stuck in. Mm-hmm. You never know. And that's the beauty and the maze of what hope requires of you, is you never know how close you are to breaking through the other side. And that's tough.
George Lucas actually has a really great quote on hope. I'm not sure when he said this, but it's just really perfect. The secret is to not give up hope. It's very hard too, because if you're really doing something worthwhile, I think you will be pushed to the brink of hopelessness before you come through to the other side. Just reaffirming what you just said. Like, and I have kind of a thesis about what I think hope actually is. Yeah. and especially how it plays out specifically, in the saga. Hope is the pull to the light. It is the tendril that pulls us out of the darkness. It is the turning towards the light that, Qui-Gon Jinn has talked about in Master and Apprentice. And it's effectively the hero's journey, finding bliss, finding joy, seeking joy. Hope is those things that allows us to find our way out of the darkness and find our bliss and find our joy. And some people would describe it as like an optimistic state, that we maybe falsely are in. But I actually prefer to think of it more like, so you're in a dark forest and suddenly light peeks through the leaves and you can actually, with your eyes closed, still feel it. You might not be able to see it in that moment, cobwebs in your eyes or whatever, but you can still feel the light. There is hope for something better than the dark, terrible forest.
Yeah, there have been some, I've done a lot of research on the idea of hope in the last week or so, and there's been a few concepts that have really stood out to me. Because for me, we've talked about this even in our music episodes, I am so I have to focus on what I know and what I see and actions and very specific things. I struggle with dealing with things in the abstract. I need very specific steps. If I'm okay, how do I gain the idea of hope? I am the kind of person who suffered from severe depression for 8 years of my life, and not to the point where I ever considered taking my life or anything like that. But I mean, I had times in my life where I had so little idea of what hope could be that I was an emotionally unavailable shell of a human being who was still perfectly capable of doing my job and what was expected of me. But I felt nothing in anything I did. I didn't have hope. I didn't have expectations. I just did whatever came and thought nothing of it. And I literally couldn't figure out how to find what that was. People would tell me life is worth more than this. It means more than this. You have to find that. This isn't sustainable. And I'm you're not wrong, but you're giving me nothing to go on here. And so I actually I have come into my own a lot in the last couple of years and learned a lot of really good lessons. And I have these things in ways I've never had them before through very unconventional circumstances, such as this process that people have gone through the last few weeks. It has helped me realize that that is genuinely something I have been able to find, and I've kept it despite feeling that despair. And that's something that's difficult with hope, is you can find it, but how do you make it not slip away? How do you make it not slip through your fingers or blow away in the breeze when things get scary? And so one of the things that...
Can you give me an example of something that you feel comfortable with sharing that you've been through that now is when you faced especially what we had hoped for Tross? I think that's part of it. It's we had so many hopes for what the story would represent, what the story would tell us, what the community meant, what our efforts and our love of, this story meant to us.
I mean, I can say that I have gone through a journey that I can pinpoint with how these movies have actually come out, because part of how I've interacted with them has been part of what has helped me move past that. So I joked about this the last time I was on your podcast. When I saw The Force Awakens the first time, I wasn't able to see it until a few weeks after it had been released, because I literally didn't have enough money, because I had lost everything in the 6 months prior to that. I lost my car. I kind of lost touch with my family. I ended up getting kicked out of the place I was living. I couldn't pay my rent. I couldn't do it. I was just, everything was falling apart. And with the couple of cents I could scrape together, I was like, I should go see this movie to just distract me from life for 2 hours. And I was listening to the soundtrack because that was free and I could do that. And then I realized that was like, there's something here that I am connecting with in a way I have not connected with anything in 7 years. And it was something tangible that I could hear, I could write, I could notate, I could put it on a piece of paper. And people started reading those things and interacting with that. And that was like the first social connection I had had to people since I'd left college previous to that, in like 4 years. And people were starting to talk to me, and people would check in on me, even if they were just, my internet friends. They would still check. I was like, this was a new concept to me that the door had been opened because I saw this and I wanted to write about it. And I started doing that. And, we went through a long period of time in those 2 years of lots of struggle where people were having a really hard time staying, like, because from the get-go, I was definitely in the Raylo camp from the beginning, and people were really struggling to stay because it was so, some people can just only handle so many death threats, and I totally get it. It was a really, really rough time. And for me, partly I avoided a lot of it. I wasn't really big enough that people cared. But even the stuff that did come knocking on my door, I was still so empty as a person that it just was like doing and bounced right off. Like it didn't even affect me. And I didn't even start noticing that like those things would bother me until I had been there long enough that those problems started to die away. So I didn't personally experience that kind of like in fandom despair at the time that a lot of people were. Time passed. I got my job, moved here to Florida. And then after a couple months, The Last Jedi came out. And I remember feeling like I was owed something, or no, people were owed something from me about the music, about whatever it was. And I felt like I didn't have anything to deliver, because for the first time in my life, I was like, I had friends and I was doing things and I was feeling things emotionally, and I wasn't so like in the nitty gritty details anymore that at first I felt like I really didn't connect with the music of The Last Jedi very much. And so I felt like I didn't have things to offer people because I was like in a mental headspace I hadn't been in like 9 years. And it was very odd. And I felt bad for a while. And that was like when Christy first started reaching out to me, and like I didn't even notice what was going on because I was kind of so distant from it. And so it was kind of like my own like mini Goldilocks conundrum for me inside of these 3 movies, where at first when The Force Awakens came out, like I was still that just shell of a human being. Just I saw things as like data points and numbers, and some people connected with that, and that's what helped kind of propel me into a different mindset. And then The Last Jedi came out, and it was very emotional and it was very abstract, and that fit really well with the movie itself. And I was able to connect with that a lot, but I felt like I didn't have a lot to offer, and I kind of felt bad about it. And I've been through a really rough year this past year that's taught me some very important lessons. And as Trask came out, I realized that I had taken all of the things that I had learned from when I was that very analytical, like shell of a human being person, and combined them with the things I'd learned when I was very emotional and abstract. And I had like pared myself down to who I wanted to be. And I've seen the movie a number of times now, partly because I knew we were doing our music episode, so I wanted to take lots of notes. But like I was able to be emotional when I wanted to and be analytical when I wanted to. And I could make my own joy out of it. And I didn't let it just sort of push me in the direction that it wanted to. There were parts of it that I was like, I can analyze this for what it is, and that's fine. And other parts that I'm like, I can experience this emotionally, and that's fine. And some people might be like, you're cherry picking things, but life is about cherry picking your joy. Not everything is going to make you happy all the time, and not everything makes everybody happy. And there's nothing wrong with cherry picking that joy out for yourself, as long as you're doing it in a healthy and sustainable way. And I'm not going to lie, like, that's kind of how I'm viewing how I'm interacting with this. And right now I'm like, these are the things that I love, and I'm saving those things. Like, take my bad energy 2019 and run away with it. But like, these things are coming with me. And like, I love these concepts, and the stuff that like I struggle with, I can still accept it and analyze it and struggle with it. But I get to cherry pick the things that I want. And I get to have my hope. Nobody gets to take that away from me. And it's been like this weird journey that I've sort of been able to track through this, which, I mean, a lot of people are going to be like, what's your story on like how you handled mental illness? And I'm like, well, it's not very replicable for other people, but I can tell it to you. And I'm grateful that it happened the way that it happened, even if it didn't end up happening the way I expected, because it's helping me deal with actual real life problems. And we had kind of vaguely talked about this a little bit, and I can't remember if we mentioned it in our other episode, but when I talked to you right when it had come out, and I said, I realized through how I felt at the end of this that I hadn't healed from a previous encounter that I'd had, previous trauma that I'd dealt with. But it was good for me because I realized that I had dealt with that in certain ways and knew that I could deal with this. And so it was funny. This is a very long roundabout way to come back to what I wanted to say, which was there are things that I've really been able to connect with. And one of them was the idea that hope is not just necessarily this abstract concept that you can't kind of grab out of the sky, but that like there are three parts of it that all sort of have to be made up together. And if one of them is missing, it doesn't work. But if one of them becomes stronger, then they all become stronger. And so hope is part of it. And then in order to have hope, you have to have some sort of like trust or belief or faith in something. Otherwise, there's nothing to hope in. And then the third part of it is that you also have to look outwardly to other people and
connect with others
to seek to increase the joy in other people, because otherwise, what's the point? And so if you're able to strengthen your hope, it helps to strengthen how you feel about other people, and it helps to strengthen whatever that belief or faith you have. And that might be in like a child or a relationship or, you know, religious beliefs or whatever it is. But all of those things work together, and that makes it feel so much more tangible than just like, you have to have hope that things will get better. I'm like, okay, but I feel no hope. I feel nothing. I feel hopeless. It is dark. It is dismal. And so it's like, okay, well, if you can't worry about the hope part right now, worry about serving other people, looking to other people, worry about what it is that you find to be important. And as you strengthen those things, your hope will be strengthened too. There is no way to strengthen that concept and leave hope behind. And that was something I connected with very deeply, because sometimes you do genuinely feel helpless, and you feel like everything is out of your grasp, or everything that you believed in came crashing down, and none of it matters anymore. But the joy that you felt beforehand isn't negated. You still felt that joy. You still deserved that joy, and you can still find joy in things, but it's hard. And
it's hard.
that's life. Life is hard.
Yeah.
How dare.
And like, to use a Tross example, the main thing that Ben Solo brought Rey in her darkest pit of hell was hope.
Yeah.
It wasn't said out loud, but you can see it on her face. She believed in Ben Solo in that moment. To reiterate what you were just saying, she believed in the Force. She believed in Ben Solo. Ben Solo brought hope to Rey.
Yeah.
Enough for her to do what she needed to do.
Yeah. And I mean, hope, it's weird, but like sometimes you feel like if you have nothing, you have to hold on to the things that aren't like, you can't buy them with money. You can't buy them with time. You can't buy them with energy. You just have to buy them with what's inside of you. And And those things are hope, and those things are like how you feel about other people and love. And not all of them are going to be accessible to you all the time. That's just not possible. And sometimes you have to buy into your despair a little bit to understand it in order to know how to work around it. And you have to like give everything that you're feeling enough time of day and not just push it to the side. Because if you push it to the side, it never gets dealt with, and it never heals. And yeah, one of the other things that I really liked was talking about how hope has to be addressed actively. It can't be sustained passively, because passive hope is just wishful thinking. That's not active. Yeah. It's not an active plan or mindset.
Well, what are you doing today to help others to seek joy, right? Because joy fundamentally is light, is the guiding post by which hope draws along, right?
Yeah.
What are you doing to find the things that bring you joy in your daily life or in, throughout your life? And, that's what Campbell would say is finding your bliss. You seek your bliss and you find it out. And that draws you closer to the path that you should be on rather than what path you might be on.
Yeah. I mean, because there's a part of this that we haven't addressed that I think sometimes we don't realize, that a lot of hope is based in the idea of trust. So if you go to the concept, like, Leia's hope quote from The Last Jedi, it said,
hope is like the sun. If you only believe in it when you
there. Can see it.
When you can see it, you'll never make it through the night.
And that resonates because you trust that at the end of the night, the sun is going to come up. And maybe that night lasts years and decades and eras, but you still have to trust that at the end of the night, the sun is going to come up. And there is no way for you to know after the sun has set whether it is genuinely going to come back up the next morning, or if while it's set, it's going to get destroyed. You don't know that, but you have to trust that it is going to. And it's really hard to maintain your hope when the trust that someone has built with you in a relationship, in an idea, in a story, in your daily life experiences, if that trust that you have built and sustained yourself upon is broken, it is very difficult to maintain hope past that broken trust. And at that point, you've put so much into this faith that you had, something that you said, I had to have that coupled with hope and how I was serving other people. And that part of it was broken, and it takes other parts down with it. There's no avoiding that, but you have to find something else that you believe in. And that's really hard. And I think that's why the concept kind of tears you down and makes you hurt so badly so quickly, is because it's betrayal at that point. And it's hard to maintain hope in the face of betrayal. And you still have to keep trusting. Like, so much of life is about trust. Trust that the sun's going to come up. Trust that the bank is going to cash your checks. Trust in everything. Trust that they're still going to have milk at the grocery store. Like, you have to base your life in trust. And it's inevitably going to get broken sometimes, but you have to actively continue to seek hope past the broken trust that falls into your life. Because if you let yourself get beaten down and everything else starts to shrink, it just shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. You have to try to keep building the other ones up, or they'll all pull each other down. And that's the hardest part, is when an outside force cuts into that, because you didn't make that decision, but someone else broke that trust. And that's the hardest, I think, to recover from in that whole cycle, is when it wasn't because of your self-fulfilled prophecy. It was because someone else had a hand in ruining what you had hoped for. Yeah.
That's really interesting, because some of the wisest people I've ever listened to speak about this, like Joseph Campbell and Stephen Colbert, oddly, is that the understanding of where they stand comes from the understanding that all life is suffering and that everybody endures pain and hardship. And that by interconnecting with others, you are able to genuinely create love that could be somebody else's light. And at the right moment, that light might be reflected back at you.
Yeah. So I guess I'll share this. In my experiences that I've kind of gone through this year, there's been some instances where I've had friends come to me asking for advice because they are dealing with a situation that they know is similar to one that I'm dealing with. And there was a time a friend came to me and she said, I don't understand what's in the water these days, but all of a sudden people are just being rude to me for no reason. And like, they're being so disrespectful of my time and it's not fair. And I never ask anything of them. And they're being so rude to me. And I'm done. And I never want to talk to them again. And I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I said, I have been through a lot with a lot of people, but I never burned the bridges between myself and those people. I know that a lot of them walked away from the bridge and locked the door at the other side, but I never burned it down because it hurts. It's a lot easier for you yourself to make the decision to say, you're never coming back because I'm not letting you. You feel powerful to have that. It gives you a sense of confidence and control over the situation. But I never burned those bridges down because I still have hope that someday that person might unlock the door on the other end and want or need to walk across that bridge. And I would never want to take away that need from them because if every other bridge in their life had been burned and the only one they had left was on the other side of a door that they had the key to, and they opened that door and found that that bridge was also burned, then they could have nothing. And for me, it's hard to say, I just have to sit here and hope. I don't get to end the story on my own terms. I don't get to say, this is how it is because I'm saying this is how it is. That hope hurts more than me saying, I'm ending the story the way I want it to be, because there's a part of your heart that's left open and it may never, ever get filled again. But I never know if someone is going to need that lifeline, and I removed their opportunity to have it. And so sometimes hope is hard because it feels more painful for a shorter amount, like for a very long amount of time. It just is this very small pinprick. And especially if you have 5, 10, 50 of these tiny pinpricks all the time, because they're people you care about and you love them and you want what's best for them. I mean, if someone's done something horrible to you, it's different. But I mean, these are people who I care about, but our paths have drifted away from each other. But I never know. I didn't have the closure as to why that was the case. I didn't understand everything. And in anger, I could have abandoned any possibility of that ever being a relationship again. But I didn't want that. I didn't want someday to think, heaven forbid, something would happen to any of them and me be like, what if I just hadn't done that? And I still had been there for them. I thinking outwardly about other people, even in the midst of being at one of the lowest points of my life, was one of the only things that helped me maintain the hope that I needed. And so thinking outwardly about others helped me to understand why I wanted to do that, because I still cared about them. And then it gives me more hope. And then I can still think about others, and it cycles up in the right way. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt. And I think that's the hard part, is that you expect that, like, if you do all the right things, it's going to be great. And it's going to be sunshine and daisies and rainbows and unicorns all the time. But that's not how life works.
Yeah.
Sometimes it hurts.
Yeah. And it hurts to have hope. It hurts to, like, just what you said, like, you know, I have hope that there are people who have hurt me or have disappointed me in the past, that they will, you know, get their stuff together and figure it out. And like you said, unlock the door, either for good or because they need something, they need hope.
Yeah. And it's not to say that like in that moment, it's me being like, I'm the better person and I'm doing this because I'm better than you. Like it's not about that. It's about saying like, this is something that can't happen right now because of mistakes I've made or mistakes that you've made or whatever it is. And sometimes when you know that you've made mistakes, you want to make one last one and just say like, and we're done. And you're like, I'm this far, fine, whatever, walk backwards into hell, face God, like you're like, this is what I've done. And fine, I'm going to do one more thing. I made as many mistakes as I did. I'm going to make one more. But it's harder to admit that you had fault, to admit that you had made mistakes and still have hope that it could be better someday. And it's like a long-term pain that's just sort of very numbly pinpricked into your finger. But I think, I don't know. I don't have a lot of experiences of times where I've done large, painful, like disposals of people in my life or anything like that. And I don't know, maybe it's the same amount of pain, but it's like all at once as opposed to over a long period of time. I don't know. But I think that's the sucky part, is that it's a good thing because it helps to sustain you and helps you reach your goals and helps you connect with other people. But sometimes having hope doesn't feel good. Sometimes it hurts a little.
Yeah.
And that does make it difficult. But yeah.
Definitely.
Sorry, I didn't really think I was going to tell that story, but here we are.
That's okay.
It's fine.
It's good. I like to understand my shadows. I like to understand the things that are chaining me in my darker thoughts. And I like to focus on the hope of better. I don't ignore those things. I just choose a time and a place when I have the emotional stamina, I call it spoons, to deal with those things that are standing in the way of me succeeding or dreaming or living, For a long period of time, I actually suffered from pretty major depression as well. I had postpartum depression after my daughter, and it was very bad. And at one point, I just decided to try to be the best version of myself. Mm-hmm. And that helped me look past the darkness that I was currently in, mm-hmm. and see the version of me that I've always thought was impossible to find. What is she like? So instead of focusing on, this impossible version that I can imagine, but I can never attain, I ask about the things that she would do. She loves other people with a Ben Solo-like passion to run straight into hell for love. She tries very hard at the things that she wants to do, as best as she can. She loves her family. She's there to support others. She takes care of herself. That one I'm still working on.
Same.
But when I'm not able to do it, she also, this awesome, amazing version of me, also forgives myself for not being able to live up to the perfect version of myself and says, hey, what went wrong? How can we try better next time? How can we do something a little bit different? Because the forgiveness for not being strong enough or not being good enough or not having the strength to do it, this one time is the key to traveling down the impossible knife's edge point bridge towards the joy on the other side. That drive to walk along a knife's edge, which is a Joseph Campbellinian lecture actually on Lancelot, and how he walked across a bridge made of swords. And that was him basically metaphorically following his bliss on his hero's journey, because at any moment, if he was swept away, if he, teetered one side to the other, he would fall into the waters below and be swept away and fall off. But instead of getting frustrated with himself if he wobbled or missed a step, he forgave himself and continued to walk forward. And so part of the hope is being endlessly forgiving and still trying.
Yeah. It's interesting because a couple of the instances that hope showed up in the scripts was not in dialogue, but in like descriptors or those sorts of things. And a couple of the instances in The Force Awakens, because the numbers I have are just of like spoken ones, but there were a couple of instances about how like as the fleet is approaching on Takodana, that Han looks to them in hope, and like hope fills his face. And the same thing when the Falcon finds Rey and Finn in the snow on Starkiller at the very end, that her face recognizes that light and is filled with hope. And sometimes like hope is something tangible and outwardly that we, it's the little thing that we can put on the shelf and say like, that is my hope, whether it's a relationship or a child or a belief system, and say like, that is what I believe in. But sometimes it sweeps you up in the moment and might be tied to something you never even would have thought about. Yeah. And to say like, there's like a difference between like things that you hope for and things that you hope in. That like things you hope for, like instances that you hope happen. Like, I hope I get the promotion. I hope I can go see my family for Christmas, like whatever it is. I hope for those things to happen. But I also have hope in the idea of redemption, or I have hope in the power of love, or I like being able to separate those two things sometimes helps you understand better how to maintain hope in the face of despair. If you hoped to see your family for Christmas and then it didn't happen, you could easily lose hope, but you realize that you're hoping in the connection with your family and the time spent together. Maybe you can still do that again later and hope for a different future event. So understanding that there's a difference between those two things can help to sustain you when maybe something that you hoped for didn't happen, but you still hope in the same things, whether or not those experiences happened or not. And I think that ties back very closely to how a lot of people are feeling right now, is because we hoped for events to transpire and many of them did not, but we still hope in the same things. We still hope in the idea of many
love.
Of us have hope in love and
redemption and understanding kind of like what is the point of suffering, but to understand light and joy and help others with compassion and give hope to others when they're suffering and they've been through it. That's part of experiencing pain, is that you can recognize and empathize with pain in others so that you can be their hope. And right now, I think so many people are very understandably in despair, feeling betrayal from not receiving events that were hoped for, because it wasn't necessarily that it was a fleeting hope, but it made sense. And it was something that had been actively seeked for a long period of time, for 20, 40 years of time. And balance, meaning, understanding.
Yeah.
Things like that, like the saga's end.
And people had the right to hope for things. We all have the right to hope for things. And there's no justification as to why someone can say that your opinions and feelings aren't valid because this is fiction. But like, our life is just fiction to somebody else who doesn't know us personally. Whether or not we're living it or seeing it firsthand doesn't change the fact that it is a story and it's playing out in front of us and it influences us. If someone on the other side of the world tells you their entire life story, that's fiction to you. You don't know it. You haven't experienced it. Whether or not it's true doesn't mean anything. So every story that isn't our own is its own brand of fiction, whether or not it really happened or it really didn't happen. So we still relate to those stories the same way, whether they happened in our universe or not. It still exists in its own realm of fiction. We exist inside of ourselves only. We can connect with other people, but our stories are only our own. And how we interact with other types of stories, whether it's a true, real life event story of a person on the other side of the globe or a mythical space opera fairy tale, you're allowed to connect with those however you want. You're allowed to hope for things in those however you want, because otherwise, what's the point of hoping for things in your own life? That's the only real story you get to live. You might as well trial run it in as many other stories as you have in front of you.
And if you get disappointed, you learn how to accept it, understand it, move forward, and hope again, love again, experience the joy and passion again.
Yeah. There's a really nice Emily Dickinson quote that says, "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without words and never stops at all." Because hope is a feeling more than anything else. It's a feeling of light. I think a lot of people find it as a feeling of warmth and a feeling of comfort, even if it's maybe not as comfortable as you would like it to be.
Well, I think it's like a fire, like a spark. And when you're keeping it warm, it can burn you a little bit in its effort to keep going.
Yeah. And I don't know. I don't know necessarily like what the magical answer is I'm trying to find in my brain. I'll never find it. That's the joy of life. But
it's the journey, though. That's the problem, is that you're in the midst of your own journey, and it's very hard to have the transcendence of mind to be like, hey, I see that you're going up and down all of these hills and it's very hard. And I saw that you were in a valley, a little ways ago. I'm talking to yourself. Basically, You're talking to yourself. But like from the bird's eye view, you can't have that transcendent thought structure, that almost meta thought of, hey, I see that you're in that valley, but you see that big hill? You're going to be at that peak eventually. Yeah. And you're going to be actually able to see all of the struggles that you have been through if you keep on walking the path and feel it and know that you're seeking, hope and joy and love. And it's the love between others. It's the love, for ourselves. It's the love that, we have for our world, for the people that live in it. And it's these concepts are hard in a world where we're interconnected but also disconnected. And I think that's why we need them more than ever before.
Yeah. It's interesting. One of the things that I came across as I was researching for this was there was someone who used to work with like relief aid for hurricane victims. And they said that the most important thing in recognizing and attributing to someone's success if they had been devastated by this natural disaster was to determine whether they saw themselves as psychological victims or psychological survivors. And if you are in a victim mindset, you are waiting for someone to come help you. You're like, I'm suffering. I've been through this and I need help. Someone needs to come help me. But if you're in a psychological state of survival, you recognize that you need to help yourself. And turning victims to survivors was like the most important step to understand and to believe that they were going to be okay. Because if they could recognize within themselves how they needed help and what they needed to do for themselves, they had far more chance of being able to get past that misery, past that despair, than someone who is like, I need help. Someone needs to come help me. Because everybody has that time where they need help. Whether it's physical or mental or psychological or whatever it is, everybody's at a point where they're like, I need help. And admitting that you need help is important. But at a certain point, you have to realize that it has to be self-sustained. It can't always come from an outside source. And recognizing where your shortcomings are, or what your shadow is, or what's holding you back is a really important part of knowing what it is that you need help with. For me, as I came into the new year, I didn't want to just be like, these are the things I want for myself. I want to, all the normal things. I want to save money. I want to lose weight. I want to do this. And I'm like, that's not helping myself. That's me wishfully thinking for things. Like me saying, okay, I know that I struggle with saving money because I eat out all the time. And I eat out all the time because I'm too lazy to go grocery shopping. And I'm too lazy to go grocery shopping because I don't want to do anything after work. And saying these are things that I can help myself with. I can recognize these problems inside of myself and say, this is the steps you need to take to overcome this problem. And that's what helps you build the hope that you have, because you see a plan that you can put into action, rather than being like, I want to save money. And then 3 weeks later being like, it's not working. Darn, I didn't save any money. It was like, well, you didn't set yourself up for success. You didn't recognize where your shortcomings were. Of course, you're not going to have hope that it's going to get better. You don't have a plan to follow. You don't have an action that you can apply. If you just have this enigma idea of what you want, that's not tangible enough to produce results. And sometimes you just have to gird up your loins and go do it. You got to go to work. And the hope just isn't going to be dumped down on top of your head. It's going to kind of suck for the first little while until you start to chip away at whatever's containing you and recognize your actual problems. And it's hard to do that to yourself. And it's really hard when you want help and no one maybe is able to help you because circumstance, or maybe a situation you've gotten yourself into. It's hard to look inwardly and know that sometimes you're your own worst enemy in your hopelessness. It's a hard conversation to have with yourself. I've had it a lot of times.
Well, and I wanted to bring up this article that was actually on StarWars.com. It's just an opinion piece on how fear can actually lead you to hope.
Yeah.
And it's written by Matt Moore, and he quotes Charles Soule and Kevin Scott and Delilah Dawson, all of these great authors that are kind of working in different areas, both in books and audio dramas and comics of Star Wars. Mm-hmm. And his point is that when you're faced with, an overwhelming situation, which evokes fear, you look for what is your guiding light out of the fear versus acting in a sense of protection against that fear, right? Yeah. So if you're trying to shore up and protect yourself from what you fear to lose, that's, not necessarily the best thing to do. Rather, you try to find compassion and love and seek where you can help against that fear rather than trying to prevent the fear from happening.
Yeah.
It's just really, really an interesting article. And hoping for things to happen and then them not happening, or you having a fear that they won't happen, is that fear of loss, right? And that desolation. Hoping in things, forward facing, hoping in people, hoping in a better tomorrow, that drives you towards forward-facing thinking and is seeking the joy in the moment.
Yeah. And I mean, I know we've kind of circled back to, The Rise of Skywalker a lot, but I remember when we had talked, I think when we were doing the music one, and I said, you know what, there's things I'm taking into 2020 with me that nobody can take away with me. I'm taking my smile. I'm taking that saber exchange. I'm taking all that stuff with me, and no one's going to stop me. And I think a lot of people are having a hard time because, something that they've invested in, something they've had a lot of hope in hasn't come to fruition. But the reason why I'm taking those things with me is because I'm I have hoped to see this progression in someone that I care about. And I got that. And that's what I'm taking with me, whether that's
and it
this
wasn't
character
in the package that we wanted it or the way that we wanted it, but we are taking that joy. We are taking that love. We are taking that peace and hoping for more, or hoping for different, or hoping for better in the future.
Yeah. And that concept is replicable in other places in my life, and recognizing why it's important to me helps me to be able to replicate it in other ways. So if I find, like Dear Sweet Baby Boy Smile to be the most uplifting thing of 2019 for me, why is it that way? Because it's someone that I saw struggling, that I wanted to see get better, and they got better and they found what they wanted out of life. And I just want to go back and knock on 2014 my door and be like, hey, you person who has no hope for the future, who never thinks it's going to get better, look at the face, look at the dimples, look at them, because it's going to get better. And I want to see people in my life get better. I want to see myself get better. I want to see that smile in other people. That's why it meant so much to me. That's why I had so much hope in that, is because I hoped in that concept. I didn't hope, sure, there's plenty of Tumblr posts that were like, all I want is for him to smile. Sure, we can hope in that. But I hoped for the idea of seeing someone recognize that they could be better, taking the steps to be better, and finding the joy in that. Because I need that in my own life. If I ever get married someday, we need that together in a marriage. If I have children someday, they need that in their life. Those are replicable things that I can have hope in. Just because one instance, one frame, one snapshot of my life doesn't look the way I expected it to be, doesn't mean that there aren't 1,000 million trillion billion more snapshots to be made, that I can find the things that I want and replicate them as many times as possible.
Yeah.
And that's me cherry picking my joy out of this. But like, come at me. Like, I don't care.
Understanding that the bad can wash away, like in a very Zen-like way. The bad washes away, and the joy and the hope and the light carries you forward on your journey is the point. That is like what Leia went through all of her time. It's like everything sucked all the time, and she endlessly hoped that things would turn out better, that she could help, that she could be of service to others, that she could make a difference, that there was a meaning to it. And I love that about her.
Yeah. And I love how like Rey recognizes that when she goes there and Luke's like, no, it's time for the Jedi to end. And she's like, your sister sent me here with hope, with the hope that she's been dragging around since freaking Vader, like, and she didn't even know it. Like, she's been dragging this hope around, and she literally scooped 98% of it up and gave it to me and told me to bring it here to you, and kept the other 2%
and you're
on the
telling
base.
me no?
And you're telling me no. She deserves to know why. She has suffered through this and hoped in this for so long. She deserves to know why. And like, it's important to recognize that, because like we said, hope is not passive. It has to be active. And
you have
that's
to
why
actively,
it hurts.
Yes, you have to actively choose
over and over.
Love, to trust, to go out there and do things. But it's the only way things get better, as hard as it is.
Yeah.
I have hope in everybody that listens to this podcast, and I have hope in you, Felicia. You were one of my first phone calls after the movie.
Yeah.
And I remember listening to you, and I was very scared. I had a lot of fear that you would be, in a really bad place. And I now understand that, the things that you've suffered through have helped you, with an incredible resilience to, disappointment, and still being able to seek joy.
Yeah. And it's something that, like, I really do wish I could have seen this for myself all those years ago, because, you know, you get stuck in the time and you're like, this is what I deserve. I deserve to be unhappy. I made decisions that led me to this. This is my fate and I deserve it. And that's where, you know, the dark side concepts aren't built on nothing. Like, yeah. they're built in real life experience.
As George called himself, and that myth is a form of archaeological psychology.
Yeah.
It's like understanding the pain and the darkness and all of those things is part of understanding our mythos, which is Star Wars right now.
Yeah. And you look at someone in that state of mind and you're like, it's going to get better. And they're like, no, it's not.
Or
like,
no
it's
way.
Not. I know it's not. It's never going to get better. And you're like, you see that from the outside and you're like, no, it is. And it's the same thing. You look at these people, you look at Ben when he's in the labyrinth and you're like, it can be better. And he's like, no, it can't. It's too late. And you're like, it's not though. And I can't go back and change who I was. And I don't want to, because these are lessons I was going to have to learn at some point in my life. And I'm glad I've already learned them. And now I can move on to the next lessons that I have to learn. But it's so important to recognize growth and improvement, even if it's just like 0.0001%, because 2 steps forward and 1 step backward is still 1 step forward. And so much of what cultivating hope and keeping it and sustaining it is that active progression, even if someday you're really doing great and the next day you're not. And I think a lot of people are in this whirlwind right now where it's like they kind of build themselves back up and they're like, okay, I'm feeling pretty good. And then there's some stupid thing on Twitter happens and then they're like, and dead again. And then they like take a few days and build themselves back up. And there's some stupid article that's written. And it's just, you're right. This environment and this culture that we're in doesn't give us reprieve. We can't just like put it on the shelf and walk away. That's not how the world works anymore. You can blacklist as many things as you want, but if you still want to interact with it, you have to interact with both sides. And it's hard to maintain hope in that. But
also
solidifying like, what you believe in helps a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And like that ties to the concept of seeking joy, and that is driven from having, you know, compassion for others. Yeah. So let's repeat those 3 things again. I think this is a thing to end off on. So having hope.
Yeah.
Having faith in something other than yourself. It doesn't even matter if it's the energy of the universe, the interconnectedness of it all, God, you know, the concept of the Tao, you know,
your just favorite diner down the street, whatever it is, you know, you got to believe in something.
You know, the sun is going to rise tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. So faith, hope, and
service of others.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Felicia. No, it's important. And no, this is great. This is so good. And, you know, it's a concept that is hard and to nail down, especially when it's used, you know, in an offhanded way, or, you know, just in a sentence that maybe doesn't mean anything, or it's just used as a facial expression for what it means, especially in Star Wars. And then how do we look at Star Wars, or look at the concept of hope, which is so prevalent in Star Wars, and take that with us, and take that joy of understanding our place and how to maybe know where we are along our own journey so that we can see the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good. This is a great topic. I love it.
Yay.
All right, Felicia, where can people find you if they're looking for you out on the internet, you know, and want to read your brilliant mind and, you know, maybe check out your non-musical metas, since you did such an amazing job on this episode?
On Tumblr, I'm at Rayla-Musings, and on Twitter, I'm at Felicia Dubsky. Though I don't know how much I'm writing right now. I think I'm really boring. I'm just kind of taking it all in at this point.
That's
still.
okay. That's okay.
But I'm there. You can talk to me.
And you will be back to cover other things, I'm sure, especially music. I'm looking forward to, we're probably going to do something as a celebration of John Williams. So that'll be good. And then I want to start digging into especially the prequels because I love choral and I want to cover all of the choral in the prequels. And I'm looking forward to doing that from a meta music perspective. So you're coming back for that.
Okay.
Yay. All right, Felicia, thank you for coming on the show. And do you have any sign-off words about hope?
This too shall pass.
It will.
Yeah, whatever it is. Have hope.
Awesome. Thank you for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is orchestral music composed by Christy Carew for What the Force. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We'd like to thank all our patrons, especially those who love and are obsessed with What the Force. Melody, Night Huntress, In Wild Space, Susan, Jessica, Brad, Black-Eyed Lily, Anna Perez, Jawa Dog, Macau Mom, Neil, and James. Make sure you like and subscribe on your podcast app of choice or on YouTube. Leaving a 5-star review on iTunes helps other people find the show. You can connect with us on Twitter at What the Force Show, What the Force Podcast on Facebook, or on our website, whattheforce.ca. We also have a new Discord. Links are available in the liner notes. Feel free to reach out and start a conversation. Cheers.